You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, thanks for coming back to the podcast. You found Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis, and I'm your host, Steve Adams, or Mighty Blue. Each week we have a main guest on the show, and I tend to scour Facebook or get recommendations for most of my main guests, yet a few weeks ago I offered a link for you, our listeners, to come on the show and tell your story. As you know, everybody who's undertaken this journey has their own utterly unique story on how they got on when they hit the AT. Well, we've had several takers on that offer, and today we have our first guest from that new intake. And by the way, two of you recently messaged me as part of that intake, and I promise you'll be hearing from me shortly. I haven't forgotten you. Today, though, I'm chatting with Ed Riggs, or Phys Ed, who started his AT journey in March 2013, the year before I set out in 2014. Ed's is another of those almost mind-boggling stories when the hiker has to face so much more than just the trail. We're going to hear from Ed in a moment. Now, our Mighty Blue class of 23 is down to just two members, but I'm afraid we're only hearing from one of them today. I recorded Joanne Flagg on Tuesday morning, saved the recording in the place I always save those recordings, then, stupidly, I deleted it and started editing last week's recording of Joanne. The penny dropped when I was about 10 minutes into the recording. And that should probably worry me, actually, that it took 10 minutes to realise, because I thought, that sounds familiar. It was in last week's show. I'm so sorry, and I'm afraid we'll have to wait until next week for Joanne to catch us up with how she's doing. Spoiler alert, she's doing great, and she's about to hit the Smokies. But we do have Jessica to update us, so we're going to hear from her after Ed. Finally, with Katahdin tantalisingly close, George Stephanos waxes philosophical as he articulates some of the changes the AT has seen over the years. So let's get to it and meet Ed Riggs, or Phys Ed. Our guest today is Ed Riggs. He answered my call for potential guests to register as guests if they've got a story to tell. Hey, Ed, thanks for answering the call.
Oh, I'm very pleased to be here. I was excited when I saw that you were asking for volunteers, and I got right on that. So I'm glad to be here.
Well, I think, you know, as a person who's hiked the AT, that everybody does this differently and we all have a story to tell. The way in which I find people is often recommendations, but it's sometimes just posts on Facebook because somebody looks particularly cool on the top of that sign. But I don't know what's gone into people's ways of getting there. So I'm glad you did it, and I hope other guests do this as well. But trust me, you've got a story, because I know damn well that you've got a story. Now, you started the AT the year before me in 2013. What was it that made you want to do it at the age of 58?
Well, I was going to go back to when I was 12 years old. I was in a Boy Scout troop, and we set out one summer between 7th and 8th grade to hike the Horseshoe Trail, which is 100 miles between Valley Forge and Hershey, Pennsylvania. Now, the Horseshoe Trail goes all the way up to the Appalachian Trail. But we just did 100 miles of it, and I fell in love with backpacking at that
Which is a lot as a 12-year-old, isn't it? Don't you think so? It's quite a lot as a 12-year-old to do.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think of the scouts that left, I think only 6 of us completed. I think about 12 of us had started. So it was, and it was very motivational for me to be able to do that and then think, well, what can I do next? And then a guy came to my church when I was in 8th grade, and he had just completed the Appalachian Trail. He was 83 years old. He completed it in sections, and they made a pretty big deal about him in church. So I thought, wow, Appalachian Trail, I never even heard of this thing. So I looked around and talked to some people and found out what it was. And I said to my mom and dad one time, and this is when I was 13, I said, boy, would it be great to hike from Georgia all the way to Maine in one hike. And they were very supportive, and they thought, well, I don't know when you'll do that, but that's a great goal. So then I went to college, and then I got married and got a job and had kids, and that goal kind of sunk into the recesses of my memory.
Was it still there though, Ed? Did you think one day I still like to do it?
I don't know, like when our kids were little, if I was thinking one day I'd still like to do it, but I was always had it in my mind. And then when I got towards the end of I was a teacher. When I got to the end of my teaching career, I started thinking of things I could do once I retired. And I really started getting the itch to get on the trail. So I did a number of section hikes of anywhere from 60 to 100 miles and found out that I really, really wanted to do this. So I asked my building principal if I could take fourth marking period off and first marking period off and still have a job when I came back so I could do the trail. He said, you wouldn't be able to do that. And I said, oh, okay. So about a month later, I'd been thinking about that. And I thought, I really want to do this before I can't. So I went to him with my letter of resignation and retirement, and I decided to retire probably a couple of years earlier than I might have. But I really wanted to do it then. So I retired.
Hang on.
Yes.
I definitely need to interrupt you on this. Two questions come up to me immediately from what you once said. And the first one may be a bit sad. Did either of your parents live to see you do this?
My mother did. Yes.
Oh, isn't that awesome?
Yeah.
I'm so pleased. Did she recall that you'd said it when you were younger?
She did. And she knew that it was something that I had a passion about. And she absolutely did not want me to do it.
We're going to come to why she did it in a minute. But yes, of course she didn't. She worries about a little boy. Yeah. My father used to say to me, he worried about me more at 40 than he did at 4. So they always worry about you.
Yes,
so that's the truth. And the other one I was going to ask was, your wife has got a part to play in this from the point of view you decide to go and quit your job.
Yes.
So, there's something that comes up with that. So what was that conversation like? And was she supportive of you doing this?
She was way more supportive than you might imagine. I mean, she was just wonderful through the whole thing because she knew it was important to me. And when I did decide to retire, she was still working and she had a very good, well-paying job, which really enabled me to retire a little bit early.
So you became a kept man.
What's that?
You became a kept man.
Yes.
Excellent.
Exactly.
Doesn't make you a bad person.
So I became a kept man and then left the house for 6 months.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. But no, she was exceptionally supportive through the whole thing. And she still is supportive of my hiking.
So in those early days, you were, when you, as a 6th and 7th grader, you'd thought about it, you told your parents you were going to do it, and obviously life happens and not gets in the way, but life is wonderful. You raise your family, you have a great time and so on, but it was still always there. Did you, when you first met and married your wife, did she know that was an ambition, or was she? Was this not that much of a surprise to her because she knew you kind of harbored it?
Well, when we first met, it probably didn't come up much, but as we got to know each other, and certainly through the years, she realized, wow, this is something that's a passion of his. And the older I got, the more of a passion it became. And when I decided to do it, it became pretty much my sole focus was preparing for this and then getting it done.
And your children, of course, were grown up by then, so they saw you start preparing for this.
Yes.
Were they just as on board as your wife, or
absolutely?
Or were they concerned about it as well?
Well, they thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I think they thought that, wow, Dad's going to do this amazing thing, and they thought it was great. And I was keeping, as I was hiking, I was keeping a presence on Facebook with it. In fact, that was one of the main reasons I joined Facebook, was so people could kind of follow me. And they were my biggest cheerleaders as I was going through.
Don't you think that's a bit of a risk, talking about it on Facebook before you've started?
Oh, well, yes, I did that intentionally. I told everyone I knew that I was going to do this because I figured the more people I tell, the less likely I would be to quit in the middle of it. So I told everybody. I made a big deal about it and got a lot of support from people.
Facebook gets a lot of bad press, and rightly so in many ways. But to connect people in this way, where they're supporting you on this hike, that must have been great for you, because when you're on the trail, it becomes your accountability project as well, doesn't it? You put your pictures up, you say if you're doing well or if you're not doing well. Although in your case you weren't quite as honest, but we're going to come to that in a minute as well. And you're hiking prior to getting on the AT. Were you a weekend warrior, or had you gone for longer sections to prepare?
Well, I think the longest section I did was 100 miles. And my wife pointed this out to me every single time. She said, every single time you go on a section hike, you say you're going to quit and come home. And I think that was right. But section hiking is tough because you're usually starting out when you're not in shape. And it takes 3 or 4 days until you're enjoying it.
It's like starting a Georgia every time, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's
going
exactly
up down
what it's
those
like.
bloody mountains. It's a nightmare.
Yeah. But once you're into it and you get your trail legs, and it's just a wonderful thing.
Yeah. So are you a gear nut? Are you one of these people who just buys loads and loads of gear, or did you need new stuff, or did you go with what you had?
The gear I had was from 1967.
Probably not then.
I had the old aluminum frame and the big canvas Boy Scout pack, and I just had all the stuff from back then, and I had a big sleeping bag. So I did buy a better sleeping bag. I still use the same pack, however, when I was doing my section hikes. And then when I decided I really was going to do it, then I just, like I said, I retired in 2012, and I spent the next 6 months researching and buying stuff. I bought almost all of it online, which was really fun because I kept getting these presents from Amazon,
Yeah, they're not presents, don't you?
Yes.
So that's interesting. So the time you did it was about the time people started realizing they could hike the trail with lighter gear. I mean, I still went with heavy gear when I started. Mm-hmm. So your research must have been quite focused. Were you actually looking to get pounds down all the time?
I was. I wasn't going crazy with it. Like I still wanted things that were functional and worked for me.
It was a full length toothbrush, you mean?
Yeah, I had a full length toothbrush. I did not drill holes in it. But I did. Dear. I will tell you though, I was looking for gear. I wanted to get good cookware. So I got a pocket rocket stove, and I'm looking at these titanium pots that cost upwards of $100 for a pot. And I was like, I've got this aluminum pot from 7th grade that's just as light as titanium, all scratched and beat up. And I thought, I'm going to take that just because it's cool to have something from 7th grade with me while I'm still hiking. So my pot to this day is still the one I had.
Oh, very
in
old
1967.
School.
Yeah.
Very old, and still works just as well. No doubt.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you got to Amicalola. I presume you went south to north, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
You got to Amicalola and you started, I believe, on 3/13/13. Was that just because you liked the idea of the numbers? Is that right?
Oh, no, it was actually March 18th that I started.
Oh,
yes.
Damn! That wasn't as good. Nowhere near as good.
That would have been a great. Yeah.
Yeah, my notes were not good enough, obviously, for that. So, why did you choose to go in March?
That's a good question. I think it's because that's when most of the people seem to be starting. And I wanted to finish. Well, I was still figuring it's going to take me 6 months. I mean, that's the average. And I was older, and I'm thinking, well, it'll take me 6 months. I want to finish in the middle of September. So I started in the middle of March. And as it turned out, I did a little fast.
That was my thinking as well, actually. When I first went, the second time I went, only because I was homeless at the time. I was living in Airbnbs, and I was spending a fortune on Airbnb. So I started in February the second time, which I don't recommend to anybody, by the way.
No.
It is freaking cold in Georgia at that time.
Yes.
And so you weighed in at Amicalola. How much did you weigh with food and water?
Well, I myself weighed.
No, sorry. Yes,
I know,
not you.
but I want to say this. I myself weighed 202 pounds at the time when I started. But my pack weight when I hung it on the scale at Amicalola, I believe, was 38 pounds, something like that.
I was 42, and it's tough to get rid of some of that stuff, isn't it? And you actually told me before that you went through the celebrated pack shakedown at Neil Gap.
Yes.
And you sent nothing home. I've never heard anybody send nothing home.
Yeah.
Couldn't they find anything wrong with what you had?
No, there were some suggestions, but they were just, would have cut ounces, not pounds, And I said to the guy, I said, I've got everything here. Everything I have here, I want. I don't necessarily need it, but these are the things I want to carry. And he's like, well, it's your choice. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. So I just kept going with that. And then as time passed on, then you realize what you don't necessarily have to have. And I sent a few things home. Like I had hiking sandals as my camp shoes, and they weigh as much as hiking boots almost. So I sent them home and got a pair of flip-flops from Walmart that cost like $4 and weighed nothing. So those are my camp shoes then. So I cut a couple of pounds there. Yeah. But stuff like that, just things as you learn as you go.
Yeah, it's funny actually. I think the expression is you pack your fears, and to a degree you do, because you very, very quickly learn how little you need to survive on, don't you?
That is the truth. Yeah. In fact, I remember when I got home, when I was done the whole hike, and I walked to my closet and I said, why do I have so many clothes? I've gotten along with 2 T-shirts and 2 pairs of shorts for all this time. And now I've got a whole wardrobe that I don't really feel like I need.
Yeah, amazing. I must admit, I was thinking about that very thing the other day, thinking of clearing out my closet. I've got T-shirts on a top shelf, which I literally haven't worn for more than 10 years. Why? Why are they there?
Why are they still there? Yeah.
They're keeping the dust off the shelf is what they're doing at the moment, so that's a good thing. Now we come to the important bit, which is really, you knew before setting out that you had heart arrhythmia. What does that actually mean, and how did it manifest itself within you prior to going on the hike?
Well, I've been having feeling skipped heartbeats probably around 2011 or so. And I went to a cardiologist, and he did all these exams. I had to wear a heart monitor 2 or 3 times. And he determined that I had an arrhythmia, which meant that I was getting extra impulses to make my heart contract. There's 4 places that electrically my heart was made to contract. So when that would happen, it would pop into an arrhythmia, very shallow heartbeats. I wasn't getting enough blood volume, and then I would be very weak. This happened while I was running. It happened once while I was riding my bike. And that's why I went to the doctor in the first place. So once I understood what it was, I thought, well, I said to the doctor, is this going to curtail me from doing all the things I want to do? And he said, no, but just be aware that you have it. And if it starts acting up, then just slow down what you're doing. I said, okay.
But he probably didn't realize you were talking about hiking the Appalachian Trail, which burns so many calories per day and exhausts you all the time. But you actually consulted the doctor before you went out, and luckily for you, you could not have picked a better guy to check you out, could you? What was his hobby?
Yeah, well, he liked hiking and he liked parks. So I told him I'm thinking of doing the Appalachian Trail. He goes, "Oh, that's so awesome." This is while he's examining me. And then he goes off on talking about Amicalola Falls, and his family had been down there and he loved it. And they hiked up the approach trail, and he thought it'd be so cool to hike the Appalachian Trail. And I'm like, yeah, I know. That's why I'm going to do it. Can we get back to my heart? But he gave me full permission to do it. He said, you might have a problem every once in a while, but this isn't something you're not going to have a heart attack. This was not a plumbing problem. It was an electrical problem.
Right.
And he said, it's just something you're going to have to deal with. But you certainly, he said, you can go do this if you want.
So you got the clearance from the doctor, and you set out. The 18th of March, not 13th as I had.
Right.
So you set out. What were those early miles like? How'd you feel?
The first day was fantastic. Did the approach trail and then 2 more miles and stayed at that first shelter. I can't recall the name of it. The second day, we hit Sassafras Mountain, which in the scheme of things and the perspective of the whole Appalachian Trail, Sassafras Mountain isn't that big of a deal. At the time, I hadn't hiked up a mountain like that in a long time, and my heart acted up on the second day. And I had to stop, and I took my pack off, and I was sitting there, and these women came by and said, "Are you all right?" I said, "Oh, I'm fine. I just can't get up." It wasn't that bad. But the friend that I was hiking with, he went to the top, dropped his pack, and came back down to me. He took my pack up, and I walked up with him. But it still was difficult. And then the next day, everything was fine. So when I would have these episodes, it'd be very difficult for a day or part of a day. And then the next day, everything was fine. I never had 2 days in a row that were bad.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you said something when we spoke before that kind of struck me. You said, the game I have to play all the way to Maine.
Mm-hmm.
Did you talk to the doctor while you were playing that game, or had you, once you got permission, just thought, I'm going to get on with it, this is what I'm going to do?
Steve, I was so focused and I was so of the mindset, I'm going to do this, and there isn't anything that's going to stop me. If I break my leg, then I'll take a few weeks off and get back to it, or whatever it might be. And every time I had one of these episodes, I thought, well, today's going to be a tough day, but tomorrow will be better. And it always was. And I never did have contact with my doctor. And I tried to downplay it to my family, how difficult the days were when it would act up.
I'm sure, because we often talk about height management on this show, but you had to take it up a notch, didn't you? You weren't quite leveling with your wife or your mother, were you? What did you tell them?
Absolutely wasn't leveling with my mother. No, I never told her anything bad.
Good.
She would always ask me when I talked to her on the phone, she said, "How are your feet?" And I've got blisters in there, my feet hurt. And I said, "Oh, my feet are fine. Don't even worry about that." "How's your heart?" It's not bad. I'm getting along fine. But to my wife, it was full disclosure with her as far as how my heart was feeling, but only on the phone. Only on the phone. If I ended the day and it was a tough day and I'm sending a text home, my text was always another good day on the trail. And I didn't want her to worry if I wasn't able to explain that it really wasn't awful. It was challenging. But I never had the idea that anything was going to stop me.
Really? Weren't you worried about it? Because what is the prognosis of somebody under extreme intense stress every day for 6 months with an arrhythmia? Has anybody talked to you about that? What might happen? What might happen had it kept going on?
I never had that discussion with the doctor, and everybody always just said,
because you didn't want to know. Ed.
No,
that's because you didn't want to know the answer.
Honestly, that's part of it. That was part of it for sure. I knew what it felt like, and I knew days I was having trouble, I was going to have to really buckle down. But I never really wanted to have the discussion like, this is really going to be dangerous. But I went, I'm going through, like I said, every bad day. There were never two in a row. So and you really didn't want to get off because you were having a blast, weren't you? Because it's clear. Absolutely. It's clear from what you wrote to me and how great it was. That you said another great day. Can't wait till tomorrow. What was it doing for you out there? Was it how you'd imagined it to be, or was it better than what you thought it was going to be like? It was better than I thought.
Nice.
And honestly, it was way harder than I thought as well. I mean, it's people always ask me, "What's the hardest part of the trail?" And I say, that's section from Georgia to Maine. That's the hardest part.
Just that bit. Yeah.
I said, none of it's easy. I mean, it might be easy going across the Cumberland Valley where it's 13 miles where it's flat, but then there's a hill going up at the end of it. I mean, I wouldn't say there were any days that I would classify as easy, but your body adapts and you start to manage, and that's the expectation, and that's your new lifestyle, is having this challenge every day. So I really embraced that and enjoyed challenging myself every day. Yeah. And then the people that I met, as with everybody, you meet these great people and they're all doing the same thing you're doing, and you get to know them very quickly. You become fast friends when you're going through the same difficult situations. And that, that kept me going. And that was the fun of it, was at the end of the day when you're hanging around somebody's set a campfire and you're sitting around a campfire just talking about everything. That's fun. And then I really like the idea of self-reliance. I've got these friends that I'm with, but I'm the only one that's doing this for me, as far as I'm concerned. So that I really, really embrace that as well.
Because you did actually start with a friend, didn't you? But what happened to your friend? What happened to your friend?
We got to Tennessee, and he slid on a rock to the side and then slid down and caught, and he turned his ankle really badly. And anybody who's done long distance hiking, just about every day you feel like, well, I could have broken my ankle today with that little twist, but he actually turned his, and his ankle swelled up like a softball. And he thought that he'd just walk through it. And I think we went 5 or 6 more days. He'd get up at 5:30 and start walking, and then we'd catch him by the end of the day. And how was it? Well, really hurt, And then he got to Daleville, Virginia, and he decided he just had to go home because it wasn't going to get any better doing the same thing over and over, Yeah,
and funnily enough, Daleville is after about a 25-mile stretch from the previous road, I remember. It takes you up over McAfee Knob, Tinker Cliffs and so on. And it's a long time before you get to Daleville. So it's probably 2 or 3 days on trail. So, I can see why somebody might choose to go home there as well.
Yes.
But, of course, the arrhythmia wouldn't let go, would it? When did you realise that you were actually having an issue which needed some attention?
Well, I was my brother came up and hiked with me through New Jersey. So, a little bit west of Delaware Water Gap. He joined me, and we went for 5 days and got to Port Jervis. And I actually had my high school reunion. So we rented a car and I drove back, and I had felt great I felt absolutely fantastic for 2 weeks. I don't think I had one arrhythmia problem for 2 weeks. And I came back from my reunion in Philadelphia. By the way, I didn't take a 0 for my reunion.
That's impressive. That is impressive.
I hiked the last day with my brother. I think it was 4 or 5 miles. We drove down. I had my reunion. Next morning, went to my nephew's baseball game, got back in the car, drove up and hiked 3 more miles.
Impressive.
So I had 2 zeros, but no zeros.
Impressive.
But, so now I'm like, I slowed down a little bit for my brother because I didn't want to kill him, because I was doing anywhere from 15 to 20 some miles a day, and he couldn't just jump into that. So when I came back from our reunion, I was like, all right, now I'm ready to fly. I'm going to go through New Jersey, New York. I'm just going to really start moving. Well, the first day back, my heart kicked into its arrhythmia, and I got through, and I remember writing in my journal, well, this is the tough way to come back on the trail, but tomorrow I'll be fine. Well, tomorrow wasn't fine. Then I had another day that was bad. Then I got to Wawayanda Mountain, and this was on the third day. I got to Wawayanda Mountain, and I'm looking at it, sitting down.
It's big, isn't it? It looks intimidating, doesn't it? Yeah.
It looked intimidating. It's 1,200 feet. I'm like, this is intimidating. What am I going to do when I get to the whites?
Yes.
So, but I said, you just put one foot in front of the other. That's what I was always thought. So I stood up to get my pack back on, and I passed out. And I thought, when I came to, I was like, this might not be smart to keep
Really?
going.
Really? You actually thought that? Well done you.
Much less, even just crossing the roads. If I feel like I might pass out, that's not too safe.
Hang on.
So I called my wife.
Before you call your wife, why did you pass out? Was that because you said the electrical shorting, as it were, makes you reduce the blood to the brain? Is that correct?
Right. Yes.
Oh, that's what happened. Oh,
yeah.
Crikey.
Well, it reduced the oxygen in the blood to the brain.
Oh my God.
Yes. So when I passed out, that was concerning to me. So
really.
So I called my wife and I said, I'm sitting at a deli type place right there near Vernon, New Jersey. I'm looking at Wawayanda and I said to my wife, I can't do this. I can't get up this mountain. And she said she didn't know whether to be a cheerleader, like she's been the whole way, or to say, oh, please come home before you kill yourself. So she didn't know. She was kind of in between that.
Option 2 was the best one at that stage, by the way.
Yes,
if you've just passed out.
Right. So she said, sleep on it and see how you feel tomorrow. Because I also had the idea, never quit on a bad day. You quit on a good day. So I said, okay. So I hitchhiked into Vernon and I stayed at St. Thomas Church Hostel, and which isn't running anymore, by the way. No, and then I stayed next day I started and I got up Wawayanda Mountain, and I was like, wow, that was hard, but I did it. And then the whole rest of the day, which by the way was 6 miles, it took me 9 hours.
Wow.
So I thought, this is not working. So I decided that day that I was going to get off the trail. So I called my cousin, I was going to stay at her house anyway in North Jersey.
Sure.
And I said, can you pick me up a day early? She said, sure. I said, I think I'm getting off the trail. And so I got to Greenwood Lake, New York. Actually, I wanted to make it to New York because I thought it sounded better that I made it to New York than New Jersey, just that one more state.
Of course it does.
Yeah. So I got to Greenwood Lake, and there's a trail about a mile that goes down the side of the mountain into Greenwood Lake, and she picked me up there and put me on a train. I took the train to Philadelphia to Harrisburg, and then my wife picked me up, and that was it. That was the end of my hike in 2013.
Did you think it was over at that stage, or did you still immediately have plans for getting this sorted and getting back?
I absolutely thought it was over. And as I said before, I had the mindset that nothing was going to stop me from finishing this. So when something did stop me from finishing it, I was devastated is a little strong of a word, but I was so upset and totally depressed about it. I didn't come out of my house for 3 days.
Oh, wow.
I didn't even go outside. I did put on Facebook that I was going to be coming home, but I didn't say when. So a lot of people didn't even know I was home. I remember
you're a bloody nightmare to live with, because we all are. I had to come home, I got injured as well, and I knew it was terrible. I was awful.
And you can't describe really to people how. I mean, I think most people are like, "Oh, you got off the trail, you ended your hike, big deal." But no, it was a big deal to end my hike. So I went through, that was in June.
Mm-hmm.
So I went through the next month or so, and then I decided to go see my cardiologist, and he put me on the heart monitor again and heard the whole thing. And he said, there's this procedure we can do called an ablation, which I've had good success with. I said, sign me up. So in September, I went in and had an ablation, and he basically went in and cauterized the 4 places that were given the extra impulse. And Steve, the next day, I was fine.
Good Lord.
It was unbelievable. It was like a miracle.
Have you had it again? Has it come back since?
It has not. It has not come back at all. Yeah. So one day I went from I can't even could not walk up the steps of my house without stopping halfway up.
Wow.
To then I got the surgery and I was fine. So I always have kind of joked that if I'd come off in June, 2 weeks later had the ablation, I could have gone back in July and still finished.
Yeah, could have done. Yeah. I was thinking exactly that, actually. Funny you know.
But of course, I wasn't thinking that way when I came home.
And I actually read a book years ago. One of the first books I read on the Appalachian Trail called 300 Zeros by a guy actually I know, Dennis Blanchard. And he had a heart attack on trail. And he was off for 300 zeros and got back. You had 354 zeros. So how did you get back into the fitness that allowed you back on the trail in the year later?
Well, first of all, I haven't heard of that book, and I have to read it.
Yes, you do.
I definitely want to read that book. So when I decided I'm going to get back on, I thought, well, I'm going to get back on about the same time I got off, and I'm going to finish sometime in August. So nice. My desire to finish in September, I was like, well, I can finish in August, I'm sure. So when I got back on trail, I thought, well, here we go. I'm fine. Well, the first 3 days, I was like a section hiker. I'm starting all over. So I'm jumping in with these through hikers, and I'm not being able to keep up with them. I thought, well, this is great. So I had a really rough first 3 days to the point where
I've got to say, for a teacher, a smart man, why would you expect you to keep up with the through hikers if you just come back after 354 days off?
Because, I'm a teacher, but I'm also really a stubborn person. So I thought I'd jump back on here. And you had
leveled with everybody, by the way, by then, had you? Everybody knew what the situation was. Oh, good.
Yeah, everybody, right. Everybody knew.
Right, yeah.
But I also thought, well, my problem was my heart. My heart's fixed. I'll just jump right back in and it won't be a big deal.
Sure.
But then I'm hitting the hills in New York that everybody, you look at the profile on the guide, it's like, oh, New York, that's not going to be a big deal. Well, New York's pretty tough, whether you're just starting out or whether you're in the middle
of your hike. It's all a big deal. It's all a big deal.
Yeah. So it took me 4 or 5 days, and then I was back into it. I never had another real issue the whole way, and I finished in 2014 at August 21st.
And you met a guy at Graymoor, the monastery. Yes. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think it was my third day back, and I was hiking up Bear Mountain near the Hudson River. And I'm going up, and there's this guy taking a break halfway up the mountain. And I said, hey, how you doing? Oh, good. He said, why don't you take a load off? I said, no, I got to get to the top, because if I stop halfway, I take a really long break, and it's not good for me. I have to keep going. Yeah. So I went to the top and then stopped, and he came up, and we started talking. And he said, you mind if I walk with you? I'm like, no, that's great. That's great. So we walked down over Bear Mountain and then got to the Bear Mountain Zoo along the Hudson River there. And I got there and went through the zoo. And if anybody who's hiked up there knows, the zoo does close at a point during the day. Let's say it's 4:30. I'm not sure exactly what time it was. But if it was 4:30, I got there at 4:25, and he must have gotten there after 4:30, because I went through and I waited for him. He never came. He had taken the alternate route around, and I don't know where he went exactly, but he did not go where I was. So I checked into a motel there, and the next day I got back on. It was raining, miserable. I went across the Hudson up Anthony's Nose, and I was just feeling awful, as I had a couple of days before. And it got to the point where I started thinking, I can't do this. And I really thought I was back with my heart. That's the way I felt. And I thought maybe it wasn't fixed, or maybe I did too much too soon or whatever. So I decided, when I get to Graymoor Spiritual Life Center, or whatever it's called, sanctuary, that I was going to, the first person I saw, who I presumed would be a monk or something like that, I'm going to ask them if they could help me get to New York City so I could get a train and come home. I had made that decision. So I'm walking on the road up to the ball field there at Graymoor, where they allow campers to hikers to camp rather. And there's a guy sitting there at the pavilion. So I'm like, oh, talk to this guy. So I walk up to him, and it's this guy, Quaker, that I'd met the day before. And I told him, I said, I really wanted to hike with you, but I'm going to be going home. He said, why? So I started telling him, and he said, oh, Ed, you just done too much too soon. Just hike with me. I go very slow. And he did. He walked very deliberately. I wouldn't say slow. And he said, hike with me for a few days. So I hiked with him for 3 days. The third day, we went 14 miles, and I felt fantastic. Uh-huh. And he took a 0, and I decided to keep going. And from that point on, I never had a problem. And I'll tell you honestly that if I had not met him at Greenmore, I'd have gotten off the trail. And I don't think I ever would have gone back to finish it.
That is as good a definition of trail magic as you
Absolutely.
can get. Trail magic, as we've said before, is not hike or feed. A trail magic is when something happens that helps you along your way that day, isn't it?
Yeah. And his trail name was Quaker because he was of the Quaker faith. Mm-hmm. And he was calm and logical and so nice and kind. And that fed me at that point. And that he's the reason I kept going. I
bet you're emotional when you got to Katahdin, weren't you? You know, the fact that you'd had all this time off trail.
Well, when you get to Katahdin anyway, you're not sure how you're going to react. No. It's a react. You can't plan how you're going to feel, right?
No, you can't. No. So, by the way, you can practice your pose. I keep telling people, think about your pose before you get there, because you won't like the photo if you don't.
Yeah, because you don't know what it's going to be like.
Exactly, yeah.
So when I got there, people are going up and hugging the sign, they're kissing the sign. I'm just standing there looking at the sign. I didn't want to touch it because honestly, that meant two things. One, I'm done. Yeah. Like, if I touch this, I'm finished. On the other hand, it's like, I touch this and I'm finished. Like, so I stood there for a while, and then I went up and touched it. And I had presumed, because I'm kind of an emotional guy, I presumed all the way up that when I get there and touch that sign, I'm going to burst into tears. I'm going to be inconsolable. So I climbed up on top of it, and I put my arms in the air, and I took the biggest breath I could, and I did the loudest scream I could for as long as my breath would hold out. It was probably 20 seconds. And everybody was looking at me, but that's what came out. It wasn't crying. It was just pure elation. And then, from that point on, you're different. You finish this thing, and now what do I do?
Yeah. And hopefully you've satisfied your AT itch now. Do you think you'd ever go again? Because you said to me, which I wish I hadn't written it down, you said to me, I'm not really a through hiker, but I got twice as many friends, because you obviously went 2 years. Right. But, I know they'll tell you you're not a through hiker if you don't do it in the same year, but you just had 354 zeros. Is that itch still within you to go again to do an end-to-end in the same year or not?
It is, but it's not. It's not a driving itch. It's not a bothersome itch. It's just
good.
Good. I think I would like to complete it a second time in sections, and I've done just about half of it again in sections. Great. And I would love to continue that, but my sections have been 1 to 2 weeks, and now I'm 68 years old, so I think my sections now have to be like a month or month and a half.
Yeah, you're a youngster. Don't worry about that. You're 2 years younger than me. What are you talking about?
But I still, whether I complete the trail again or not, it's actually irrelevant. I just like to keep going out and being on the trail and meeting the hikers and spending time with them. I did a section hike back in April. I was going to do 300 miles. It turned out to only be about 110.
Sure.
But I ended up in Waynesboro at the Stanimal Hostel.
Yes.
It was great. That was a great place for me to stop. And that's where I did stop. Because I just sat around and talked with these through hikers and got their stories and things that they'd been through up to that point. I'd only been out for a week and a half or a week.
You get it by osmosis, don't you? You kind of soak it all in, don't you? Yeah. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and having hiked the whole thing, through hike or not is irrelevant at this point, but having hiked every step of the trail, everything they're saying, you can absolutely relate to. And everything that they're saying, you can remember, oh yeah, I did this, I had the same thing, or I remember that feeling or whatever. And you kind of relive it when you're talking to someone who's experiencing it right then.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ed, I'm so pleased that you were the first person to sign up to come on the show, because I think you got a great story, very inspirational story. To go back again, and must have been a bloody nightmare, and level with your mother. You can't. Don't encourage anybody here not to level with their mother. So
I know.
I appreciate you coming on, and appreciate you writing in, and I just wish you well in the future.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. This has been great.
Okay, buddy. Take it easy. Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers.
All right.
Bye. I told you, it had so much more than just the trail to contend with. The fact that he was able to parlay his problem into a completed hike just speaks to his determination. A determination we've heard over the years of this show, when people risk pretty much everything to get to the top of Katahdin and scream at the world from that iconic brown sign. Trust me, it's worth it. And I'm sure that Ed feels the same as well. Before we get to Jessica, I wanted to flesh out my plans a little bit for our 400th show. This has come about after plenty of suggestions from our listeners, and this is what I intend to do. I received an email a few weeks ago from a friend of the show, Hugh Icareth. Hugh's idea was about the thru hiker about to start his or her adventure next year. He wanted, I think just me, to talk about the minutiae of what a thru hike is all about, the nitty-gritty details of daily life on the trail. So I thought about it, and I decided to reach out to friends I've interviewed in the past. Each of them will have their own take, and I intend to contact potential guests for that show in the coming week. I've no idea how it's going to turn out, but if just one thru hiker next year makes it through as a result of something one of our guests says on the 400th show, then, well, it would have been worth it, wouldn't it? So look out for that in a couple of weeks. Now, let's hear from Jessica. We spoke on Wednesday as she was now heading south with Iron Mike. Here she is.
Let's try that again.
I was about to say exactly those words. Let's try that again. So where are you now? You're on the top of a mountain?
I'm somewhere in Vermont, yes.
Oh, great. So how's it been? When did you start back?
Sunday.
Right.
Yeah, a couple of days ago.
Right. So was that break a good thing for you? Did you where'd you go? Where'd you hang out for the break?
We took a couple of days at the Notch Hostel. Just to...
Oh, of course. Old home for you.
Yeah. Just to relax a little bit. And then we also went down to Manchester. We both got massages with my best friend, Heather, who is the best massage therapist on the planet, which was much needed after months of beating ourselves up in the north. And then we got back on trail on Sunday.
So was it a mental reset as well to take a few days off?
Yeah, after, as everybody knows, New Hampshire and Maine are hard, and
no shit.
It's hard on the body, it's hard on the mind. So just taking a couple of days to let things heal up a little bit and kind of mentally get prepared for the last 726 miles.
So thinking back to those first steps, I suppose you went to the bridge into the bridge that crosses. Is it the Connecticut River? I think it's the Connecticut River.
Yes, I believe it's the Connecticut River. Yep. How
did you feel? Did you feel I'm glad to be back because you took a few days off and got cleaned up and tidied up, I guess? Did you feel excited by the prospect?
I feel determined to get this done. Crossing the Vermont-New Hampshire border was a little bit bittersweet, especially that part, because let's face it, I dreamed of walking into my home state, from the South, and that didn't happen. But I walked out of it, and I'm determined to get these last few miles done. So
yeah. So
get back to work.
So how'd the first few days gone then?
Pretty good. Vermont is completely different. It's been a little bit of an adjustment, I think, because, in the 100-mile wilderness and Maine and even parts of New Hampshire, you don't even see a house, and then we're sitting there and seeing lights and hearing cars and crossing roads fairly frequently. And even the forest is just completely different. There's so much of it that's just so open. There's fairly tall trees, but there's really no understory and no brush, and at least the parts that we've been through so far. And it was very, very different so far.
Now, much as I did with Joanne, I struggle thinking about the AT going south to work out where you are, where you keep going next. So what's in Vermont? Oh, well, there's Killington, of course, in Vermont. Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Yeah. So you've been over that?
Not yet.
Okay.
We're going to be hopefully at the end of Long Trail tomorrow, and then we should be going over Killington the next couple of days. And the crazy part for us is that's the last 4,000 footer really on the trail for us.
It's amazing, isn't it, really? I mean,
it really is.
But you know what, though? Unfortunately, I've got bad news for you here. A climb is still a climb.
We've already found that out.
Yeah, you're still going uphill. It's and it's a struggle to get there. But every time it's worth it. And I think also it's fair to say that the vast majority of what you've done the last couple of months, certainly doing New Hampshire and Maine, has been the most substantive part of this trial in terms of difficulty. So, your difficulty is definitely going to improve, it's going to get less going forward. But of course, you need to keep your legs going because, you've still got these climbs to make. How are you actually feeling physically now then?
Not too bad. Obviously, the massages helped. I think it's just a matter of the miles. Like my feet hurt every day. Like, they're just going to hurt. It's just part of the deal, I think, at this point. But I think the thing that's really we've been talking about a lot is kind of that underlying fatigue that is not going to go away with a 0 or 2 or 4. That's going to take some time, and that is, this part of Vermont, we keep kidding, it's like the Virginia roller coaster all over again. It doesn't last very long, but you go like straight up and you go straight back down, and it's kicking our butts.
But the fatigue thing, you're right, it's not going to get any better by taking a couple of zeros. So don't take that many zeros. You might as well just get on with it because you're going to be fatigued anyway. There is no doubt about it. This is a tiring thing. And I know towards the end of my hike, I was really feeling it. I was physically and mentally exhausted when I finished both my hikes. And while I loved it and I still felt pretty strong, there was so much of your body is aching by this stage. And you still got quite a few miles to go, obviously. Where are you? I'm trying to think. Where did you flip up from?
So we went from Harper's Ferry to Hanover, New Hampshire.
Right.
So that's what we get. So now we got back on in Hanover. We're headed south back to Harper's Ferry.
But you know what? That's you're right. It's not the Katahdin you have. It'll certainly be your Katahdin, and it'd be a lovely way to finish that walk along the canal path. Is bloody marvelous.
Yeah.
So I think you'll enjoy that part of it as well. Did you have your halfway picture taken at Harper's Ferry?
Yes, we did. We went into the agency office and all that back then. So yeah.
Right. And what are you doing in terms of resupplies now? Have you changed how you set your hike up now, or are you now in a rhythm that you've been using for some time?
I don't think we're really making any changes. The biggest thing I think we're going to do our best to do is actually employ the system that you've talked about before when you were doing your hikes of, we have so many miles a day because I do have a deadline in mind at this point that we need to make. And if we're making more than that, kind of keeping track a little bit better so that at least we
debits
know.
Debits and credits. That's I don't know who told me that, or where I just thought about it myself. I had no idea, to be honest with you. But that works out really well, and it gives you're really kind of buoyed by just an extra mile you've done. So, have you worked out how many miles a day you need to do?
It's about 13 miles a day at this point.
Well, you know what? You couldn't do that in New Hampshire and Maine, or maybe in Maine you could some of the time, but certainly 13 miles a day in the area you're in now is going to be much, much more feasible than it was. So, I'd be quite confident if I were you doing that.
Yeah, I think once we get past Killington, it'll be more feasible. Like the last couple of days, yesterday, we almost made it 13 miles, and we had a heck of a lot of gain. I can't remember how much it was. So, we were pretty darn tired at the end of the day. We got 2,600 feet of gain today, and we're only going 10 something because the next stopping off point is 18 miles away. We know we can't do that. So, and the funny thing is, I think both of us way overpacked on food. We got a little traumatized by the 100-mile wilderness. We had to call in for extra food from Shaw's a couple of times. And I think this time we went way too much in the other direction. So the packs have been like way, way too heavy. And that's bogging us down a little bit. But hopefully the next resupply will readjust.
Well, the way I learned second time was certainly to make sure I came into town with nothing at all in my pack, food-wise. I know it's a bit of a risk, but it's not that much of a risk on the AT because, especially now you're in these states, it's easier to get off the trail. Yeah. So you can, if need be, get a hitch. And I was going to ask you, are you an early starter in the morning?
No.
Well, you know what? I would strongly advise you to think about that. Just set your alarm 1 hour earlier, just 1 hour. It's not that much, and because you're still going to go to bed early, in the evening anyway. Normally, because you're tired anyway. Yeah. But I find that getting, what was the expression, 10 by 12? Getting 10 miles in by 12 o'clock. The rest of your day is to you because you've only got to knock out another 3 miles. You may want to do about another 5 miles, but getting those early miles in made a lot of difference to my hike, and I think you should think about that because it's a mindset thing. Once you get going, if you get started, say 9 o'clock in the morning, by lunchtime you've probably only got about 5 or 6 miles, so you've got to push for the rest of the afternoon, don't you?
Yeah, and part of the problem, of course, we're running into now, especially being in the northern states, is it's dark, like really dark by 7 o'clock. And with, the trail's been a little bit treacherous here in Vermont just because there's still a lot of green leaves on the trees, but there's also a heck of a lot of leaves down. So you can't see what you're stepping into, and that definitely makes me nervous. And we've been having a heck of a time just making sure we're still on the trail. It's really easy to lose the trail with everything covered up. So the first night we ended up night hiking a little bit, and I think that last mile took us way longer than it probably would have otherwise. But it's really hard to tell where the trail is right now.
So one thing you might want to keep in mind, and another thing I was thinking about when you said this, if Killington is your last 4,000 footer, it's all downhill from here. Effectively, it is all downhill from here. So just kind of look at it that way. You might feel it's a little bit easier than you might otherwise have thought.
Well, and I've talked to a couple of other people recently, and that's, all they keep saying is like, oh my gosh, it's going to, with the shape that you guys are in, it's going to be so much easier because you're not having all this stuff. And I will say, like, the footbed itself, so far in Vermont, we're not walking on granite slabs all day, so that's been nice. But we're still doing quite a bit of up and down here. So once that levels off a bit, I think we'll be able to make more miles. But getting up earlier in the morning would probably be a good idea. You'll also
who's the
love
worst?
This one. You'll love this one. I woke up this morning and sat up and saw in the shelter, and I see like fluff at the bottom of where I was sleeping, and it quickly came to realize a mouse chewed 2 holes in the footbox of my quilt last night while I was in it.
Oh dear.
So maybe that's another reason to get up earlier. I don't know, but that was like,
I think it is.
Are you kidding me? Like,
Well, look, I'm really pleased you're at least back on the road. I still wasn't sure whether you'd restart, and I know you said you're determined, and which is great. You have restarted and you're back into it. And I would just tweak 1 or 2 of those things a little bit, and you will find it a lot easier. Starting earlier, taking less food. You don't need to pack those Phys anymore. You know how far you can walk. So if you've got, say, 3 days supply, make sure there's, it's because there's, say, 35 miles ahead, there's a resupply, and then you'll find you manage the hike that much better as well. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Have you found that the temperatures going down at night? I mean, how has it been?
It's definitely getting chilly. We're looking at 40s, high 30s at night at this point. 50s, maybe 60s during the day. So yeah, it's definitely cooling off, and you know me, I'm a cold-blooded girl. So
I will still never forget that picture of you in your sleeping bag. Have you still got that super hot sleeping bag?
I don't have it with me, but
You need it back.
I'm starting to wonder if I'm going to have to get it back. I really hope I don't, but because I just really don't want to carry the weight. I did switch out my sleeping pad to my more winter R-value pad while we were in New Hampshire, because I figured maybe that'll be enough to get me through. I've got chemical hand warmers and toe warmers on me just in case. I haven't had to break into those just yet. But, I'm hoping that I don't have to carry the 3-pound sleeping bag, because that's not going to make the pack any lighter.
Well, that's why you need to ditch some of that food, Jessica. You really do.
Yeah.
You don't need to carry 5 days worth of supply if you can go into town 3 days later. You should always think where you're going to be and say, have I got enough food to get there? And that's where you should work, I think. But, you manage it the way you want to manage it, because it's your hike. So, look, enjoy it. Say hi to the big guy for me, and we'll catch up again next week, okay?
All right. Sounds good.
Cheers then. Bye.
Bye.
I thought she sounded even more determined, and I think she may have taken on board a few of my suggestions. I mean, getting up an hour earlier should really have been a no-brainer. I mean, I know I took ages to get out of camp, but because I did get up earlier, I could get 10 by 12 sometimes on the trail. You'd be amazed at how much better you feel sitting on a log somewhere in a forest, munching your lunch with 10 miles under your belt. And I know that some people are wary of not carrying enough food, but coming into a town or to a road with a nearby resupply with absolutely no food in your bag is such a good feeling. It's all about the planning and being confident you can either resupply when you planned, or at the very least, you can get off the trail and to a resupply in time to eat again. For me, it was great to hear Jessica's determination once more. A big thank you to our awesome donors again this week. Monthly donors: Gail Posey, Sabre Thompson, Todd Withrow, Ron Ward, Suzanne Johnson, Betty McInerney, Michael Garr, Sharon James, Sean Deadwiley and Ann Pickens stuck with us again, while John Park and the lovely Beth Backer-Stengham also donated. And that wasn't the first time for Beth either. Thanks to all of you. Much appreciated. Finally, and I promise to have both of our class of 23 members next week, finally, George Stefanos is chomping at the bit to get his first sight of Katahdin. I'll see you next week. Chapter 23, The River. Stratton, Maine to Monson, Maine. Wednesday, the 21st of September 1983, mile 1958.3. It was extremely warm last night, but not uncomfortable. Nevertheless, I slept fitfully. My sleep was troubled by strange dreams, perhaps in part due to the weather report I had heard just before turning in. The very unseasonable warm, moist air was about to be displaced by a cold front, the leading edge of an Arctic air mass. Tonight or tomorrow should bring some interesting weather to these mountains. Today, being the first official day of autumn, Mother Nature seemed determined to mark the occasion with some special pyrotechnics. I understand that the lowland lake country coming up after the Bigelow Range is famous for its mud to begin with. It should be chock full of extra fun now. I cleared out of my motel room at 10:40, beating checkout time for a change by a full 20 minutes. I had been awake since 8 o'clock, loading my pack with the fresh set of clean clothes, food and other provisions from my mail drop, and then refilling the carton with items to be shipped home. It was the heaviest return package of the entire trip. One useless pair of hiking boots, a set of dirty clothes, and a mess of surplus food. My family had thought I needed 10 days' worth of food for the trail between Stratton and Monson, while I needed just 5. I kept the 10 days' supply of munchies. I had sufficient space in my backpack, and their weight will diminish soon enough. Except for my day-tripping days in Vermont and New Hampshire, I have never been able to carry enough chew food. I walked down the street to the post office and mailed the package. It cost $4.99, leaving me with only enough money for a restaurant lunch before leaving town and a few dollars in emergency funds for the trail. I hope my family can find a way to send that last money order to me in Monson. After the post office, I stopped at the Stratton Diner for what could very well be my final 2 cheeseburgers on the Appalachian Trail, some fresh fries, a Coke and some ice cream. I blew most of my remaining cash, but I would be just as screwed in Monson with $10 as I will be with 4 if the money does not arrive. My thumb was out as I walked the outskirts of the village. A few cars passed, but none stopped. After 10 minutes, I paused to take a picture of another piece of small-town America along the Appalachian Trail. In the resulting shot, the only car on the road was a small red compact. Coincidentally, that turned out to be my ride. My benefactors were two attractive young German women. One hopped into the back seat and I crammed into the front passenger seat with my backpack. We flew down the winding, narrow, two-lane highway like it was the Autobahn, screaming past big logging trucks on blind curves as they chattered blithely away in German. For some reason, the excellent chance that I was going to perish in a flaming wreck on Main 27, less than 2 weeks' hike from Katahdin, struck my trail-warped mind as hysterical, and I could not stop laughing. They seemed to approve of my adventurous attitude. The initial 2 miles of the Appalachian Trail crossed several low ridges and small streams as it wound through level forests towards the base of the Bigelow Range. The next 1¼ miles followed an old abandoned logging road up the side of the ridge to a junction with the Bigelow Range Trail. It was a very reasonable climb for Maine, but that was on the old road. At the junction, the road became the Bigelow Range Trail, and the Appalachian Trail turned off, straight uphill. It climbed steeply over huge boulders and tilted rock slabs for a half-mile to the ridgeline, and then immediately assaulted a steep knob. A couple of short side trails led to lookouts. Summer was attempting to linger into autumn. The air was very hazy and humid, and north-south perspectives were a complete whiteout. The only real views were those east and west along the ridge itself. On very clear days, Bigelow is reported to provide vistas extending to Katahdin. Oh well, I guess I will simply have to wait a little longer for the first sight of my dream mountain. After the first knob, the trail passed over a couple of lesser bumps before descending a very short, very steep ravine to Horn's Pond, located high up on the ridge crest. I took a 45-minute break at one of a pair of 6-man shelters situated on the shore of the pond. I read the register, filled my water bottle at the nearby spring, took some pictures and had lunch. My only regret is that I left without remembering to check out the famous experimental solar toilet about which everybody was raving in their register entries. That sucked. I had not seen a truly memorable toilet since Smart's Mountain in New Hampshire. The Appalachian Trail climbed a very steep half-mile to the summit of the South Horn, one of a pair of open, rocky crags rising above the north shore of the pond. Not surprisingly, the other is called North Horn. Angry winds were shrieking past South Horn's summit, and the haze was thickening. In the distance, a sullen line of black clouds was moving in fast from the northwestern horizon. Hello, the cold front was coming on like a runaway train. One intense thunderstorm experienced atop a high ridge crest, Paris Mountain, Virginia, is plenty for any one lifetime. I put my head down and started cruising along the 2 miles of ridgeline between Southhorn and West Peak, the main summit of Bigelow. The front cruised faster. As I chugged along, the wind grew nastier, and the sky turned as black as Mother Nature's vicious little heart. From Southhorn, the ridgeline ahead had been visible as far as Avery and West Peaks, but everything was socked in by clouds before I was halfway across. Wonderful idea, that 45-minute break by the pond. The trail once again became very steep and rocky as I climbed towards West Peak, but preferring not to greet the coming major storm on an exposed summit at 4,150 feet in elevation, I kept flying, streaming sweat. I negotiated the narrow razorback summit ridge through the teeth of howling winds and scrambled recklessly back down below tree line in the narrow pass between West and Avery Peak. On the floor of Bigelow Col, I gratefully reached tonight's destination, the Myron H. Avery Memorial Lean-To. It was 5:45. A middle-aged gentleman from Pennsylvania had already arrived, apparently a while ago, as he had already eaten dinner and was rolled up in his sleeping bag. The shelter register at Horn's Pond had informed me that the spring below the col was dry, but my shelter companion confirmed that fact. I had 3 pints of water from a spring near the pond, but I wanted water for cooking too. I walked down the side trail and looked around until I found the source of the spring. When running, the water issues forth from some large boulders. It was not running now, but I found plenty of clear, clean standing water in a small cave-like depression in the rocks. Not wishing to chance spending 3 days strapped to a toilet seat at this point of the adventure, I used that standing water only for cooking. The 3 pints already in my canteen were more than sufficient for my drinking water needs. It is 8:10 as I write this, pitch black, and the wind has been absolutely going nuts. As of yet, however, no rain has fallen. Hope that it does not hold off until tomorrow and nail me on the trail. There's going to be a big storm. The only question is when. Thursday, the 22nd of September, 1983, mile 1968.9. The clouds didn't burst until late last night, but when they did, it poured like I've not seen since Virginia. For probably the last time on this journey, I lay inside a shelter high on a mountain and experienced a raging tempest, complete with immense forks of lightning, massive explosions of thunder, roaring winds and torrents of rain. Few of the shelter roofs under which I have slept on this hike would have stood that onslaught, but this one did all right. There were only 2 good-sized leaks to be avoided. Morning emerged reluctantly from the murk, leaving a cold, bleak light through the persisting deluge. I glanced outside, rolled over, and slept in until 8:30. By that time, the rain had tapered off to a fine drizzle. It was chilly and dank as I made my breakfast and prepared to depart, but the storm clouds were gradually dissipating. A good steady breeze was blowing, rapidly drying out the leaves and brush. I did not even need my rain gear when I left the shelter at 10:15. It remained overcast, but the ceiling had lifted well above the mountain. Avery Peak sported an extensive alpine area on and around the summit and a spectacular panoramic view. On extremely clear days, Katahdin could be seen in the distance, but today was not such a day. That was disappointing, but forecasters called for an all-day rain, so I was not complaining. The air was dry and comfortable, and the sun was even trying to burn through the overcast. I did have a breathtaking view of Flagstaff Lake, an enormous, sprawling, 11-mile-long expanse of water in the valley below. A new trail relocation covered the descent from Bigelow and the climb up Little Bigelow. The footway was deadly after last night's heavy rains. It had not yet become compacted from hiking traffic. Pieces kept breaking off and sliding away, taking my feet with them. I took another main backflip on the way down. Gee, the autumn sky sure looked pretty, but what were those stars doing up there in the middle of the day? Why did those little tweeting birdies keep circling my head? On balance, the relay was a fairly good trail and should be a pleasure to walk once the ground has settled. In the sag between Bigelow and Little Bigelow, I passed the Safford Brook Trail, which had once been part of the Appalachian Trail. In the 1930s and 40s, the AT had passed through a farming valley along the banks of the Dead River, past the villages of Flagstaff and Dead River. A new route was necessitated by the fact that this stretch of river, the valley, those villages, and most of that portion of the Appalachian Trail no longer exists. The Safford Brook Trail now at dead ends less than 2 miles from its junction with the present AT at a shore of Flagstaff Lake. This enormous man-made body of water is a storage lake for the hydroelectric dam built by a Maine power company in 1949. Elements of Appalachian Trail history now lie slumbering beneath the long, rippling swells. Back to 1983, the ascent of Little Bigelow was gradual and the new trail well laid out. The AT reached the ridgeline of the mountain and traversed a series of rocky knobs, several of which had open ledges. The sun had finally broken through, and the day had turned clear and beautiful. The haze was gone from the air, replaced by a crisp hint of chill. An arc of mountains stretching from Bigelow to Saddleback coiled behind me. Ahead lay miles of relatively flat lake country. The section of trail coming down off Little Bigelow was as hazardous as any on the entire Appalachian Trail. A tortuous climb down huge boulders in a steep ravine. Long drops isolated each rock from the next, and the stream cascading over them was swollen from last night's rain, often obliterating the path. Negotiating this mess took a great deal of slow, painstaking effort. For once, I had to keep my mind on the trail, or else. Nevertheless, it took me more than a half hour to safely cover that deadly quarter-mile. After that, it was smooth sailing. I came to the beginning of the lowlands through which I will be travelling all the way to Monson. On the flat ground, covered with wild profusions of moss and ferns and broken by the muddy brown channels of sluggish streams, the trail travelled through the dark beauty of a hemlock forest. There was plenty of deep mud and slime through which to slog and skirt around when I could, but at least it was walking trail rather than a crawl down mossy, dripping, sheer rock faces. I came to one very memorable spot. The Appalachian Trail brushed the tip of a long arm of Flagstaff Lake at a lonely gravel shore strewn with piles of bleached white driftwood resembling heaps of old bones. Facing the lake, the drowned outlet of Bog Brook was a long, narrow finger of the bay to my left. Beyond that lay 2 small coves with Little Bigelow rising above them, lingering wisps of cloud clinging to its ravines. Ahead of me, a long way off, 2 wooded, rock-tipped peninsulas formed the mouth of my secluded bay. In the distance, a low, dome-shaped mountain rose above the far shore of the lake, with small, low clouds scudding across its summit. It was a scene immense in scope, yet intimate in its solitude. A fresh breeze was blowing, sending choppy waves breaking upon the rocks at the shoreline. For a moment, I could almost hear the whispers of generations living and toiling to make a life for themselves in a once vibrant valley which now lay entombed beneath the cold blue waters. For a moment, I could almost touch something lovely and sad. It was a light for which I have no name, an intangible for which I have been groping since this quest began, something I have indeed been seeking my entire life. A light which my wandering soul has come to embody in the word Katahdin. Beauty does not diminish in sadness. It rises to a heartbreaking intensity, like a song. The world has forever lost much that was fair, and yet much endures. Much had been lost in my life, yet enough spirit survived to carry me, against all odds, through turbulent storms to this peaceful shore on the borderland of the realisation of hopeless dreams. The light quickly fled. I lingered trying to grasp it, but that just made it slip away all the more rapidly. The voices faded too, leaving behind the songs of wind through trees and waters murmuring over the beach of stones. The valley and all that was in it were dead. The waters took them long ago. Autumn was beginning to touch the rustling leaves. A wide blaze of red flared high up on the right side of the distant dome-shaped mountain. The long summer of my quest was dying too. I arrived at tonight's home at 5:15. It was less than the 10th mile beyond the Appalachian Trail crossing of Long Falls Dam Road, a lonesome stretch of pavement along which the nearest village was 20 miles away. Jerome Brook Lean-To was built in 1939 by the Civilian Conservation Corps. The ensuing 45 years had not been kind. Despite the relative seclusion, the place has the used-up, run-down look of most shelters easily accessible by car. Its major problems is the condition of its baseball bat floor. When such constructions, unique to the older shelters in Maine, are in good shape, I find them rather comfortable. The narrow, rounded logs allow you to easily shift the pressure points on which you are lying. These are all warped and tilted out of line, creating an interesting variation of a medieval torture device for those who attempt to sleep on them. In short, the place is a pit, but it, it's home for tonight. I came less than 11 miles today, but there's no reason to go further. 16 miles ahead lies the Kennebec River, the toughest and most hazardous waterford on the Appalachian Trail. It's a major obstacle which can only be waded in the early morning before the hydroelectric dams upstream release their backup to generate the day's electricity and the waters rise to unfordable levels. I cannot go further than that riverbank tomorrow, even if I walk on another 5 miles or so today, so I may as well stay in a shelter tonight. Tomorrow I will hike to within striking distance of the ford, which I will cross early in the morning. There are ways of arranging for a boat to ferry a backpacker across the river. That is the sane and sensible thing to do. If you've read the rest of this story, you do not need me to tell you what my choice is. Late night note. I am not alone in this shelter. An animal has joined me. A huge, fat, pot-bellied white rabbit with an attitude. Now, I've seen everything. Good night.